I'm John Horn of the Los Angeles Times. I'm joined by Rebecca Keegan, my colleague in the calendar section. Hi, Rebecca.
Hi, John.
We're going to talk about some movies coming out in the first quarter of the year, typically a dumping ground, but maybe not so much this year.
Yeah, I mean, usually this time of year is for bad horror movies or bad romantic comedies at Valentine's Day, but every year there are a few movies that kind of pop out and grab people's attention. For our upcoming Sneaks issue, I wrote about a movie called Peabody and Sherman. It's an animated film that is actually a takeoff of the 1950s and 60s cartoon, kind of updates it.
I'm writing about Noah, which is director Darren Aronofsky's attempt to retell the story of Noah and his Ark, starring Russell Crowe. I read the script, I visited the set. It's a very ambitious movie, cost more than $100 million. For it to work, it's going to have to appeal to a very broad segment of the audience, not just people who kind of sleep with their Bibles under their pillows. But it also feels as if a lot of the Academy Award movies that are kind of playing in limited release are going to really dominate the first part of the year.
Yeah, that's typically what's out. In addition to those dumping ground movies that I mentioned, all the big Oscar movies. One thing that we've seen in recent years is studios starting to bring out blockbuster or potential blockbusters earlier in the year. The first Hunger Games movie, for instance, came out in the first quarter. Oz, the Great and Powerful, came out in the first quarter. One movie that may surprise people is coming out in April early is the Captain America sequel.
Yeah, that feels to me like much more of a summer movie than a kind of first quarter movie. The other movie I'm kind of surprised by it, but I know the circumstances are a little different. Monuments Men, which is George Clooney's World War II story. This was supposed to be a big Oscar contender. He wasn't able to finish the film in time, so it moved from its December release into the new year, as did the new Jack Ryan movie with Chris Pine.
Yeah, it's interesting. We think that movie studios pick when to release a movie based on these very scientific things, and they do. It's important, but there are also all sorts of other issues having to do with their slate, what else is in theaters that they have to think about.
And certainly this past summer, there were so many movies coming out on top of each other. I think the studios looked at this past year and said, we can't just jam every movie we have into the summer, so we're going to spread it out, and that's why I think we're seeing so many kind of high-profile movies coming out at the beginning of the year.
So maybe it's good news for people. Maybe you don't have to wait all the way until May for something in the theater that entices you.
I guess we'll find out once we start seeing the movies.
That's right.
I'm John Horn of Los Angeles Times. To read more on these stories, go to latimes.com/movies.